Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. We are in, I think, episode 16, and I'll just turn on my screen sharing here. And so we're going to be talking about how to maximize security awareness team success through organizational structure and delegated responsibilities. Sounds like a mouthful and not a very sexy title, but I think it's funny because, last time we did artificial intelligence and we had over 115 people actually register, which was great. And quite a few people showed up. But this time, it's a more focused topic, maybe not so widely known or such wide interest. But I expect we'll have some very good discussions because the people who are here care about security awareness and are interested in the organizational aspects of it. So I think it's going to be a great discussion. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. And I'm going to just do a quick introduction myself. I'm Scott Wright, CEO of ClickArmor, and we're the gamified security awareness platform and security awareness services company. So if you have any interest in security awareness solutions or services, you can contact us later on. I'll do one slide later in the session just to talk a little bit about ClickArmor to pay the bills. But other than that, it's not a product-focused session today. The Cybersecurity Awareness Forum we've been running for almost a year now. I think it started in May or June 2022. We didn't do it quite as often in the summertime, I don't think, but we're keeping a bi-weekly cadence right now. So we're trying to get it every 2 weeks, and I'll let you know when the next one is at the end of this session. But as I mentioned today, the theme is how to maximize your security awareness team's success through organizational structure and delegation. And I don't claim to have all the answers on this, but we have some experts on the panel, and love to hear other people's opinions through the chat if you can. And once we get started, I'm actually going to start with a poll. And once we get that poll running and people can be filling it in, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. And so I'm going to try to start the poll if I can find the control for it. There we are. For some reason, Zoom hides it when I'm not using it. All right, so I'm going to launch a poll for you folks. And while you're doing the poll, if you haven't already, please type in where you're coming from around the world. We'll do a quick check-in to see who's joined us from where, and then we'll get into the topics. So in the poll right now, we're asking people 3 questions. Does your organization's security awareness team report into the IT organization or an IT-oriented security team? Yes, no, or I don't know. Number 2 is, which of these are the greatest management challenges of your security awareness team? Number 1 is getting managers across the organization to prioritize security awareness, so you get participation. Getting budgets approved, getting clear direction on security awareness program goals, or getting top executives to recognize security awareness risks. And if you find other challenges in the management side of security awareness, you can enter that in the chat as well. So looking forward to hearing your input on those. And the third question is, ideally, which executive or senior management role do you think security awareness should report into? Chief Information Officer, Chief Risk Officer, Chief Information Security Officer, Senior IT Manager, Senior Human Resources Manager, or Training and Development Manager. So we're going to let people continue answering these for a few minutes. And while we're doing that, I'm going to ask our panel to do some quick introductions. I will turn off my screen sharing so we can see all you folks. There we are. Perfect. So why don't we start with Ryan, and then we'll go to Tyler.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Scott. I'm Ryan Healey-Ogden. I'm the Director of Business Development here at ClickArmor. And also thank you, Tina, for the support. She mentioned we are colleagues with the Cybersecurity Global Alliance, another fantastic organization of like-minded individuals who just care and love about cybersecurity. And so thank you everyone for coming out today.
Excellent. And Tyler.
Well, thanks for having me again, Scott. Happy to talk about cybersecurity again. Nice joining you too, Ryan. My name is Tyler Sweeney. Good morning to all of you on the West Coast. A little bit of a time zone difference here. I'm a cybersecurity specialist and account manager here at Global CTI, a managed service provider that's focused on servicing our customers here in California.
Always good to see you, Tyler.
Excellent. All right. We'll just do a quick run through where people checked in from before we do our poll results. We have, I think, let's see, Manal Russell from Toronto. That's great. And we have Tina from Vancouver and Gemma from Swindon, England. Awesome. So we got some great intercontinental participation. And Falguni from Dallas. Thanks very much, folks, for letting us know where you're coming from and for participating in the poll. It's a smaller group, so these poll statistics are not necessarily all that statistically relevant, but I'm going to share the results and we can chat about them. So if you folks can see this. Question number 1, we had 5 respondents. So does your organization's security awareness team report into the IT organization or an IT security oriented team or IT oriented security team? So 4 of the 5 said yes. 1 said, I don't know. That's really interesting. It's not a surprise. A lot of times security awareness does fall in the IT team. So we could talk about the pros and cons of that and how that works for people. Number 2, the poll question was, which of these are the greatest management challenge of your security awareness team? And you could have picked as many of these as you wanted, but the biggest challenge was getting managers across the organization to prioritize security awareness. And I think that impacts engagement, participation, so we could talk about that. And getting budgets approved was 2 out of 5. Getting clear direction on security awareness program goals was also 2 out of 5. Getting top execs to recognize security awareness risks beyond compliance was 1 out of 5. And that's great. Good info for us. And then the third one is, ideally, which executive or senior management role do you think security awareness should report it to? And so out of 5, we have Chief Information Officer was 1, Chief Risk Officer was 1, Chief Information Security Officer was 2. And then 1 was under Training and Development Manager. So love to hear more discussion around that, people's opinions on why they think those are the places that should be reporting into. So I'm going to just start with a little bit of a discussion. I usually in these sessions try to share a bit of information, essentially based on my knowledge and experience, and then what people would want to potentially comment on. And this may be news to you, or you may agree or disagree with it, but feel free to enter any comments about what I'm saying here in the chat. So I've put in a few common organizational structures that I've seen to show people where security awareness often lies. And I think reflecting on our first poll question, where does security awareness lie in your organization? This is probably the most common place, right? Security awareness under an IT organization. Often it's under a director of IT, under a chief information officer, something like that. I mean, there may be slight differences in titles, but I think you can sort of generally see where this would be sitting. The second one that I would put is sometimes it's under the director of HR, because it is awareness is an activity that affects the whole organization, all employees. And so a lot of times it makes sense to put the responsibility for assessing and training people under the director of HR. And there are other ways I've seen it. Sometimes there's a chief information security officer that may be at the same level as the CIO, where the security awareness role falls, which is a little bit more independent, or it could be under the chief risk officer. Sometimes organizations don't have a chief risk officer, but a lot of times if you're in financial industries or regulated industries, there is a risk officer that looks at things that includes security awareness. So those are the main areas that I've seen. If you have any comments on any of those structures, good or bad, feel free to put them in the chat. And before we turn things over to the panel, just a few considerations. When it comes to where you put security awareness in the organization, I'm generally seeing that, when you're closer to the top, you get more visibility. You got more chances to speak with, educate, and actually hear input from the top executives, CEO, and other C-suite executives, and even the board level sometimes. Also, the closer you get to the top, you have more visibility around the budget. You can speak up more often when budget talks occur, and so that can be very helpful. When you get to putting security awareness outside of IT, it's also more risk focused than compliance focused. A lot of times, the requirements for security awareness are driven by compliance, which can be okay, but a lot of times I think we feel it's better in most organizations if we can treat it more as a risk issue, because then you can actually get more value from it rather than just saying I've got the checkbox. When you get things inside the IT world, I see a lot of people where there's a natural assumption that by executives that you're going to have the natural assumption of executives is that IT should have the security awareness role. And the implications of that here are that I think it requires more education of executives and board and takes more energy to do that. It also happens to focus you a lot more on the easy metrics like click rates and participation rates rather than actual proficiency. So those are things that I've seen when it comes to how you position the role within an organization. And then when you look at the actual team itself, sometimes when you call it a team, maybe it's only one person and you're struggling for budgets, as we talked about in the poll. But something that I would say from my experience working with different teams, it's most effective when you have what I would call an extroverted team leader, somebody who isn't afraid to speak with executives and maybe disagree with people at times and make sure that the right message is getting through. People who understand risks and human traits. And that's actually a pretty rare thing. I think a lot of times, even the managers I work with recognize that, they aren't necessarily familiar with, some of the cultural issues that they have to deal with when they're reaching out to people. So this, the leader of the security awareness team should have a high influence on the planning, the budget, and even the vendors that are chosen. A lot of times we'll see that, a security awareness team manager may like a particular solution, but when it comes to actually getting it approved, maybe there are other factors. Maybe it just comes down to price. Maybe the C-suite has a close relationship with some vendor, and that can influence things maybe in a way that you wouldn't necessarily want it when you're actually the people that are running the program. So those are considerations within the team. You also want to have an organized and disciplined training administrator. So the person who's running the training, sending out the notifications, reminders, etc. They have to be ready to work on a very strict schedule, make sure things don't slip. It can get really costly if you just let things slip all the time. Also, it's really helpful. I've been in teams where they have access to communication staff. So whenever they need a bulletin done or graphics or things like that to be impactful, they can pull in somebody from the communications team and they're allocated and they have access to that resource. So it really helps then in creating routine communications like webinars, newsletters, interviews with executives and things like that. It's really helpful. And finally, it's flexible and easy to use. Training is really one of the most important things, to get value out of your awareness program and your team. Because if they're wasting a lot of time on, chasing people or trying to manage rules and things like that within a program, then it actually gets more costly and you're not getting as much return on investment. So those are the main thoughts that I had. Now I'd like to actually turn it over to you guys, to the panel and to others in the chat. We can actually pull up some of the notes that people have been making as I was rambling on. So I'll start with Tyler and see if you have any thoughts, first of all, on what we've covered already, and then I'd like to sort of dig into this question about, what are the pros and cons of having the IT team own security awareness for an organization? Oh, you're on mute, Tyler.
All right, there we go. Man, Scott, you nailed it. I think we're hinting at a lot of things we're going to get into I definitely, the way I've seen it, and I think it depends on organizational size, it tends to fall into that IT, team's purview. Because I think at the end of the day, to implement, security awareness effectively, you have to understand, at least on a fundamental level, the basics of how these attacks work. But also, with the risk side versus compliance, I think there's the real crux of this. Because I know I talked to people this week where oftentimes for either legal reasons or cyber insurance, we see it become, just a box to get ticked. And I know none of us will, agree that, the one annual security awareness, training once annual, that's pretty sparse for some of these insurance policies. So I think with IT team, they have that deeper level of understanding, but they have to have the pull, and you touched on the personality, that extroversion, someone that's going to be able to work, for risk mitigation, but also be able to communicate with leadership and make it more of an issue of importance than just, hey, did we get our, awareness, box ticked for insurance? I think that's the key. So I do think it varies depending on the size of the organization, right? Because as you get bigger, you get more and more specialized roles with people with multiple skills that more narrowly focused in on this versus, some of these smaller, medium-sized businesses. It'll probably just fall to the person that's doing IT. And if nobody else understands it, I think that's kind of what has to happen.
Really good points. Thanks for that, Tyler. Ryan?
Yeah, and also just reading some of the comments. I mean, Jem and Elizabeth are having a great conversation here about kind of, figuring out whose responsibility it is, right? And that's, it's almost like the consensus seems to be you need the skills of an HR team to be able to deal with people, right? Because as Scott, you alluded to, everyone has a different learning style, and those are things that HR professionals know how to accommodate and work with and motivate. And then you do need that understanding, like Tyler said, from an IT perspective, right? Because you have to understand what the common attack vectors are, how these things will actually be executed, so then you can explain it to users in a productive manner and support them. So, what's my ideal solution? That's a chief awareness officer. So it's a new position I've started to see out there where it is a blend of both worlds. Or it's or you put the awareness training in the hands of more of a committee. And that committee has cross-functional support from HR, from IT. Yeah. And so I think that way it kind of breaks the buckets up a little bit. So you don't have this, well, if everyone falls down the IT road, it's going to be too technical and not people-friendly. And if it goes down the HR road, it'll be too people-friendly and not IT enough. So it's like finding that fine balance to be effective, and then also, risk will come into that and everything else. Quickly said, though, at the end, it needs to be as high up as possible. So that's why get someone on the CISO, the C-suite kind of level, because without that top-down approach, almost you're gonna lose so much by moving down that org chart from step by step. So
good. You're jumping way ahead of us there, Ryan.
You're
giving us solutions and everything. That's great. No, it's all good. It's all good. We will take the conversation wherever people want to lead it. So that's cool. So and just I think I've already shared my views on the pros and cons of having the IT team own security awareness. So I'm going to move us on quickly to the next topic or question, but feel free, Ryan, to pick up anybody's chat that has been made if you want to make any comments right now.
Yeah, I mean, Manal has just made a good point again, talking about cross-function, right? And then I think Jem is just said, I'm not a technical person, yet I understand security and can translate complex topics to easy to understand materials, right? So I mean, that's a perfect person. I mean, Gemma, can you now replicate yourself and insert yourself into every organization? Because it would make everyone's life a lot easier, right? If we have these ideal situations. But a lot of the time, the technical people can't speak to, the normal workers in kind of a plain way that they want to pay attention and engage in.
And I think that's actually the key to why a lot of people find security awareness boring or irrelevant. The people that are speaking to them, or the message that they're getting from a system is so generic and not either too technical from the technical people, or just not relevant to them. It's not tailored. It doesn't necessarily mesh with their own organization. In fact, I've heard of situations where people have done, off the shelf awareness training, and literally the IT team has to send out a note saying, yeah, really good that you took the training, but remember this one part where they said on their mobile device you should do this? Well, you can't do that. So you got to do this other thing, right? So you got to unlearn what you were taught in the awareness training itself, just because the organization didn't take the time to put the right messaging together in the right context.
Well, and there's telling someone something, or there's kind of teaching and helping guide someone to a solution, right? And those are two very different things. And I think a lot of security awareness training in the past has been, I'm just going to tell you. And if I've told you, then I'm going to hold you to it. Moving on, right? And everyone just thought, well, great, we can get our cyber insurance and we can click off the risk boxes and we can put an image up on our website saying that we're cyber safe. But, have you really changed, any behaviors?
Yeah. Awesome. And Gemma's got tons of tips here and comments.
Yeah, that's a great one.
So Gemma's a consultant in the security awareness area. So she's seen a lot of organizations as I have, and trying to spread the word as we do too. So that's great. So I'm going to take us to the next question. What factors should determine where responsibility for security awareness programs are to be delegated? So just think about, we've suggested places that, they should be situated, but what's the reasoning behind that? And can we sort of justify it? If somebody wants to say, you know what, I don't think our awareness team is in the right place in the organization, what would we say to justify moving it? So
I think
you have to, Tyler, go ahead.
I think you have to figure out what your actual goals are. I think that's where this all comes from. We've touched on this earlier. Is it, and part of it is being intellectually honest with what you're looking for. Are you just seeking to tick a box for insurance? I don't know anyone that would recommend that, but we all know that's how a lot of people look at it. So what we're talking about would be not in alignment with that. On the flip side, I think that when you look at it in terms of, okay, this ticks a box for insurance, but we, want to actually mitigate these risks in a way that's effective, that conveys this information, in a way that sticks with our employees, becomes a part of their habits. To me, almost an overarching organizational culture type deal. I think that's when you're able to, we've talked about in terms of like being a C-suite executive, how can this person or team implement strategies that are needed? Will they be able to get the budget? And do they have the skills, both technically, and I don't think it has to be crazy technical, but you have to understand the threat vectors. And, likewise, do they have the interpersonal skills to actually get through to people? And I think it's interesting, Ryan, you mentioned a new, security or chief awareness officer. I think as these attacks, especially with, like ChatGPT, AI, language models that are, the days of poorly worded phishing emails, I think are long gone, because you don't even have to understand a language really to write a good phishing email. I think as we see these things grow, my idea with the progression of how this will go is I think we're going to see sort of, committees probably be the next step. So we can get people, cross-functionally in HR, risk, or on the technical side. But, a dedicated C-suite spot, that might be the natural progression, just because it's going to have to fall under someone's purview. And I think as the threats grow, that's inevitable.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, Manal made a good point here about don't take security awareness out of the security team. You have to still be connected to threat hunting, threat response, et cetera, to be effective. And it's a real dilemma, because the people who understand that stuff don't always understand the people side of the business, and vice versa. And so I think what you said, Tyler, makes a lot of sense with respect to cross-functional reporting. One of the things I've worked with a lot in the Canadian government is the concept of it used to be called an IT security coordinator. Now they call it a designated official for cybersecurity. And they actually have typically a cross-functional reporting structure where on one hand, they report into the IT organization or the CIO, and they also report to the chief security officer for the organization. So security overall, not just IT security. And that's usually often in the corporate services area, whether it's finance and admin or places like that. And the nice thing about having that kind of reporting is that you actually end up with a little more oversight, a little less conflict of interest, because there can be a lot of conflict of interest, conflicting priorities when that role is strictly in the IT space. So I don't disagree with Manal in saying, we want to keep it close to security so that it can be well aware of all of the threats and things like that. But I think it does sometimes come down to either a cross-functional role or at the very top, as Ryan said, having a chief risk officer or a chief information security officer that isn't totally IT oriented is probably the ideal, right? Because that means they're getting a broader view. They understand, they'll work with HR, they'll work with marketing, et cetera, to make sure the messaging is right. So that's kind of the view I see. And Gemma makes a bunch of questions. Yes, thanks,
Lost
Ryan.
power, which is hilarious.
Ryan,
yeah.
It's funny. I was telling Ryan I might lose power. You might have to take over. Ryan loses power and ends.
I might.
Oh, he's gone again.
It's very interesting out there. So, can I quickly just answer number 2 because I just wanted in case they missed it. But what factors should determine where the responsibility lands? I don't know if anyone mentioned this, but I'd start with a risk assessment, right? That would be as far as. And I know Tyler, you say kind of goals, and they'll very much align, right? But if you run a proper risk assessment on your organization, you're going to understand what your weaknesses are, which then kind of takes you into my second key deciding factor would be industry. Because again, if you're a more technical industry, I think I would shift that responsibility a little bit more to the IT side. If you're more in, let's say, a support kind of customer service role, like a call center, that would be more, I would drive it through an HR kind of role. Right. And so I think it depends on industry. And then finally, kind of the attack vectors, which come out of that risk assessment. So what are your major opportunities? Is it simply just, business, email compromise, or are you up against, social engineering on a daily, phishing on a daily, BEC on a daily, and outside of attacks and, insider threats, and there's more for you need to learn. Then again, it depends on where you may shift it. So those are just kind of that, and then boom, power. So
great, got all it in before the.
I got it all in. I'll be back.
And you did reflect, some of the comments Gemma mentioned. What are your key business risks, right? So looking at it from the business risk point of view, not so much the IT or technical risks. That's really important.
Oh, Manel just put up a super amazing point. We set up a human cyber risk council. With members from HR, communications, fraud, and threat hunting, right? I mean, and they meet bi-monthly. Again, that is proper cyber hygiene. Again, we wish that was the case everywhere, not just kind of the outliers. But that's a very cool thing to do.
Very nice. Tyler, did you get your say on that?
I think Manal nailed it. That having a council like that, that's the optimal thing. You're getting everyone from every field and discipline. I know we talked about conflicting interests, and I think that's the only thing when we think about, having a dedicated role, assuming the person has, the right mix, which is different of technical and interpersonal skills. The only worry for me was with a council, if you have people that you want to make sure you're all on the same page. And I think that's where, like Ryan said, a risk assessment comes into. In business risk, not just cyber risk, because cyber risks pose business risks. It's all about how they impact the business and the business's security, the bottom line. So I for me, with all things cybersecurity, it just really hinges on organizational culture and alignment. Because I think you could put in place the best structure organizationally, but if the culture is not there, the money's not going to be there. People aren't going to care. And I think that's probably more top down than anything. I think that has to come, from the CEO, from the board, because if they don't care, no one else is going to be incentivized to care.
Yeah,
or given the means to care.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, that Manal suggested the Human Cyber Risk Council, because when you start talking about risk, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, a lot of people don't necessarily understand what that means. And so you actually do, as Ryan said, have to make sure everybody's on the same page. And I think one of the things I've talked about many times in past webinars and sessions I've done is the simple risk model that I use when I try to brief executives or anyone who's not technical, for example, because it's really generic. It's just you have assets that you want to protect, and if they get impacted, they're going to cost you something, either financially or through psychological injury or things like that, or physical injury. And then you've got the threats on the other side trying to access those assets. And there's basically a straight line. Any asset that's worth something has a threat you can identify. And then in between them are the vulnerabilities, the things that allow the threats to act. And that's typically where we want to put our safeguards and controls. And so when we look at security awareness or culture, I'm looking at it as this is a control measure that we can put in place, and the better we do a job, the more we're reducing risk. And so I think that's the kind of picture that we need to communicate to executives and others in the organization, so that we're all on the same page and we're not just treating risk as some nebulous thing that's not important. It really is. In the Canadian government, I know they say, we need to use, every manager needs to use a risk-based approach for decision making. That's not cyber, that's just risks, anything, financial risks, schedule risks. And the more you know about the risks, then the more you can prioritize your budget effectively.
Yeah. And a lot of organizations, they'll be able to tell you what their risks are, financially, and all these different kind of soft spots, left, right, and center. But when it comes to cybersecurity, they can't answer that question. And it seemed, and we can train people on almost every sort of topic known to mankind right now. And people are like, yeah, give me more. And then it comes to cyber, and it's just like, no, thank you. No, pass.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, Ryan, on the point about cyber and people's apparent apprehension to it, I don't know. I think part of it is I think there's a misconception about how technical your understanding has to be to get like a pretty more than adequate level of understanding and awareness to keep yourself safe. I think I know this is probably one of the misconceptions. I talk with a lot of my C-suite level executives at companies that are clients of mine, is they think, you start talking cybersecurity, they're thinking it's an 80s movie. You got the hacker in the basement, green lines of code. It's like, okay, no.
Yeah.
That's not, we don't need to get into that. I think once people truly understand it, it's more of a logical framework, right? The same way you talk about, business risk, right? You talk to these business owners, these executives, they very clearly and without much thinking, because they've thought about it before, can tell you their business risks. And I think as we see, companies evolve, it's going to be the same with cyber. And Gemma had a good point about security people leaving the bubble, and I think that might be part of it, because IT
needs to be normalized.
Yes. Yeah. And I think IT is just kind of, and COVID's changed this a little bit. I was hoping it would do it more. IT is kind of just seen as, less of a, functional area like accounting or finance, and just sort of as a supportive thing. Whereas we all know IT is not a big deal until it doesn't work or something happens, right?
And some of the bias, and some of the bias might actually live inside of that IT security team as well. How, like, the reference of them living in a bubble, like they may believe that they're too technical to go out to the rest of the team. Like they may have, developed a bit of a culture within the security, team that knowingly or not, kind of they've put themselves, up here, and they're like, well, it's so hard to go and talk about security and stuff because nothing gets changed. So the further the divide kind of grows. I think if we can kind of normalize it, like, I'll take, training about vacation policy or, sexual harassment in the workplace or all these things. And I don't need to be a subject matter expert in order to understand and follow it, to your point, Tyler. But when people see, cyber training, they're like, well, it's outside of my pay grade, so no thanks. And you're just, but it comes down to just don't open an email, not like you need to know what how to, throw like a reverse shell and
It's interesting you mentioned that coming from the security team. And and the way you mentioned it is the way I see it a lot, where it's almost sort of this defeatist mentality where a security team is just like, all right, they're going to tick the box. And maybe they don't have click armor, right? Maybe they don't have the right tools in place.
Clearly,
because you have to engage people. But I've also, and I think this is almost secondary. I don't think this is the intention, but with that, technical skill gap, I've seen this, and like I said, it's not a pejorative thing where it's almost like, oh, these people are falling for these, silly emails. And it comes down to culture and that sort of stuff, because if you're learning from somebody, and, in this case, let's say it's the IT or cybersecurity staff, if you have if you're like, oh, I can't believe I fell for that, or I don't want to ask a question. Nobody wants to feel stupid, right?
Yeah. right?
And maybe that skill, I think part of that's where that human element comes into. And that's why I try,
Again, yeah.
like in our organization, if call me if you have a question about an email, you want to know why that was, a phishing email or whatever, talk to me about it. It's like
Yeah.
you want
You're
to,
not going to get in trouble. We're just going to learn here. It's like if I can't book my vacation, HR isn't going to yell at me that I'm stupid and don't know how to use a HR, like a booking calendar. They're just going to either come show me or help me, guide me through. Accounting's not going to say, oh, well, you can't fill out payroll, so we're not going to pay you. But when you get into that security team, like there's this apprehension sometimes of them wanting to help for whatever reason. And maybe I think, Tyler, to your point, like it's failed for so many times that it's almost like, well, what's the point?
Yeah, it is really interesting. I'm not saying that, you can't have a successful security awareness program within the IT team, but it really does take an extroverted leader, somebody who does know how to communicate and listen. I know it's too bad Fleetus couldn't make it on the call because I know he's that type of manager who, is always trying to communicate with people in their own terms. So I think that's the kind of thing that you really do need to overcome some of the sort of disadvantages of having the security awareness team buried within the IT team.
Yeah. Manel just made an amazing point there, saying we're actually working on taking a page from mental health movement for our next campaign. Let's talk about it to remove the stigma and shame of falling for a phishing scam. Brilliant. Because everyone right now, I mean, people are, they get the live phishing simulators and different things, and they're getting reprimanded. They're, now they're worried about their job. They're worried about, all these different things, and they're not actually learning anything. And it's like, but let's talk about it. Let's just normalize it. Like we all get phishing emails. It's not like we don't have to hide it in our closet and be ashamed of it. Like we have to tell users that they've done nothing wrong to receive a phishing email. They've just simply, they showed up at work, right? It's like if you just happen to be in line at the bank and someone walked in and robbed the bank, no one's going to blame you, right? You just happen to be in the wrong spot at the wrong time. So that's a great point.
Nice. Really good discussion, folks. Thanks a lot. Oh, and a new comment from Johanna. Let's before we move on, let's address this. So when having awareness and culture pros within the IT security team, information security and cybersecurity department, it's easier to change also their culture and actions so they're in the same page, enhancing awareness and culture with everyday actions and communications. Every security expert is either building the awareness or they aren't.
Yeah.
and culture or they aren't. Yeah, great point. Love that.
Yeah, they're either leading by example or just kind of back in their bubble, as everyone's kind of alluding to here.
Yeah.
Hopefully we don't have any security professionals sitting over here just being like, man, we hate you guys.
Yeah.
Well, on Ryan's point, I don't think it's ever a pejorative or taken away. I don't think or the normalizing falling for a phishing email. That's an occupational hazard, right? And I get it's embarrassing, but it might be embarrassing to get hurt at work, right? Yeah. But it doesn't mean it's your fault. You still we have workers' compensation, like those are risks with the job, and that's part of it. I think it's more stems from that bubble around the IT team, not necessarily. I mean, maybe it's looking down upon people for falling on these things, but it doesn't seem to be the case most of the time. I just think it's you got very technical people that rather be working on their computer doing technical stuff, and then you add this human element and sort of get wires crossed. And that's where finding the right person, the right organizational structure and culture for me really comes in.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to take just a moment to plug ClickArmor because we are sponsoring this. And as I said, I'm the CEO of ClickArmor. We started it 3 or 4 years ago, but I've been teaching security awareness for 15 years, doing a lot of consulting, doing a lot of tailoring of content and programs for businesses, both live and online. And I just saw, the common weaknesses and pitfalls every time was lack of engagement with the training, and the live phishing simulations were actually not always getting the results that we wanted. They're easy to run technically, but we're not always getting the right results. So that's why we created ClickArmor, was really to be something completely different, very engaging, interactive, and in a way that drives people to actually compete a little bit. And so that's the whole basis of ClickArmor. But beyond the platform, because of my experience, and now Ryan has joined us and he's got great experience in this area too, we're able to do culture assessments, maturity assessments, gap assessments, and create strategic plans, deployment plans. I often work with executives, and it turns out that sometimes IT teams or IT security awareness teams are not that comfortable going to talk to executives. They don't even know they can. And when they bring me in, sometimes I'll say, so first thing we're going to do is talk to all your executives. They go, what?
Or how?
And how? And then their manager says, yeah, we could do that. And so we set them all up and it becomes the best experience for all of them. They just couldn't believe that they'd get that kind of input for people. So it's helpful to have something beyond the platform, and that's what we're aiming to do as well. So just wanted to let people know, if you want to chat about security awareness, whether it's your program or your services, or just looking for a solution that engages people better, please contact us at clickarmor.ca, and Ryan or I will be happy to help. So third question, before we do something new and exciting that I've never tried before. I haven't even told Ryan I'm going to do this, but we'll see what happens. What can be done from a management perspective to improve security awareness teams' effectiveness within an organization? So if you're a senior manager and you've got a security awareness team working for you, what kinds of things could you ask of them or direct them on that could be useful? Any thoughts on that, Ryan?
I think I would, really kind of want to see a solid plan formed around the communication aspect of everything, and kind of, how often, how it's going to be executed. I think if we're kind of identifying some of the issues here, it's lack of communication, or it's the inability to communicate, properly, or to the right people. So I think trying to build out, a proper communication plan, and then obviously, through, I'd say, a risk assessment would complement that plan, to be able to kind of position it, have some markers, milestones to meet. But I think there has to be something in place, communicated to the organization, to try and get buy-in before anything starts.
Yeah.
And then the milestones have to be met. Anything is better with a plan. And then you can actually track it and understand your results, and then hopefully, do better for next time. So that would be my top recommendation, to hopefully, try and drive some effectiveness.
Awesome.
And cross function. I say bring everyone to the table, because everyone has a different perspective, life experience, and understanding of what's going on. And, security awareness doesn't need to be a technical thing. It just needs to be, a learning opportunity.
Awesome. Tyler, what do you think managers can do to help make their teams more effective?
Well, I mean, I'll second everything Ryan said. I think getting people from multiple areas. I think it all starts with a general cybersecurity and business risk assessment, and then aligning whatever your organizational goals are, and then coming up with a plan. Communication strategies. The one thing I thought about that I might add, because that culture element is really important, right? If people aren't, you could have the best communication strategy, all the threats identified. If people don't feel comfortable asking questions, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's where getting that top level, the highest level buy-in, right? Not even necessarily, it's great to get funding for these programs, but I, in the past, think about times where, been on calls with executive leadership where they're the one, they've been educated, they care enough, right? Because it's, their business, or they're running the business, where they're able to really implement that culture from the top down, telling employees like, hey, this is part of the business. Everybody gets these emails. I've fallen for these emails. This training is important, going beyond, ticking a box. And I find that when that comes from the top down, you kind of just see this sigh, like the shoulders drop, sigh of relief from people, where they're like, oh, okay, this is, especially with phishing simulations, I've seen those go both ways, where it becomes this, tough thing where everybody's getting, dinged for it and reprimanded. And other times where I've seen it becomes like a, competition thing, a fun thing. And I think it all, they're the same, programs we use in both cases, but it's the culture. And I think a lot of the security team, knows this, but if the, leadership doesn't want this, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Awesome points, you guys. And I'd like to welcome Manal. Thanks very much for agreeing to join us to make the panel a little more interesting.
Welcome.
Oh, we can't hear you. Are you, we might have, you're not muted, so it might be your inputs. Oh, no. As I said, you try these things that are new and they don't always work, but we'll give Manal a couple of minutes to see if she can get her configuration set up. No worries.
Yeah, Elizabeth made a good point. Just as introverted people, it's a little trickier to pull this off, because communication is the key. And I think as we've kind of said a few times, you need to have someone who's an extrovert. Someone has to get out there and be a bit of a security awareness champion. And so that is a super valid point as well. And the reprimanded thing, I just can't understand that. People make mistakes in the workplace, so often. And that's just part of being human. But all of a sudden, a click of a phishing email that doesn't result in any damage, becomes a massive issue. So it's very bizarre how the reprimand came to be in the security culture world.
All right. And now we have Gemma, who's been very active as well.
Manel, unfortunately not. We can't hear you.
Oh, we still can't hear Manel, but we will keep listening for you if you if you can do anything to change your settings. Unfortunately, Gemma, let's hope we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent.
So yeah, just wanted to hear your thoughts on anything that we've talked about, and or your tips or recommendations.
I have so many thoughts. So I think I'm probably coming at this from a different angle, because I'm a security awareness consultant. So I work with a lot of organizations. And the difference is I'm called in because they want me. So I'm not necessarily having the same battles that in-house security awareness managers are having. I'm being called in typically by the CISO to come and fix some problems. So I definitely don't have the same challenges as somebody who's an internal security awareness manager. Now, on the point around phishing simulations, most of the clients that I've had have done away with the phishing simulation, partly because unions don't agree with them, and the complaints that are made from staff when they've fallen victim to a phishing simulation causes a whole manner of grievancy type situations in UK human resources and employment law. And we see a lot of negative press around the UK government, who's been using phishing simulations and the effect that that's had on staff. I've had clients who have got call centres and they've sent out a phishing simulation, and all of the call handlers have come off the phone at the point where they've sent out a phishing simulation, which effectively shut down the business for a number of hours. So I don't advocate for use of phishing simulations, and it is something that's done in the UK still, but rightly or wrongly, I'm not sure.
Awesome. So Manal's going to try again. Can we see?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Awesome.
Yay!
This is what I always tell everyone that in the organization, that I'm not a techie and I can manage to weed my way through. So here I am.
Excellent. So just before you start, just wanted to thank Gemma for the great insights, because it really is a different perspective when you're a consultant and you see all these different things in different organizations. And sometimes you can make a common connection and say, you know what, if they all did this thing differently, things would be better. But sometimes organizations need to do things differently than what we actually recommend. So really thanks for that note, Gemma. So Manal, yes, what would you like to add?
I just wanted to add for us as an organization, we're global. And so we run into issues around, there are restrictions in the US from the regulators, where I'm in the banking industry. And so they actually are looking for consequence models that we would have and need to institute. And we've been caught a few times where they actually requested that we do that. And then it becomes a challenge of, well, we can't do that in Canada, but we need to do it in the US, but it's not the same in the UK. So for us, we're finding that balance of, even our phishing simulations, how do we configure those so that we're meeting those different layers of requirements, compliance, but then also culture, because I've just talked to someone who said that they actually, in a fintech company, send out phishing simulations every single day. which
Wow.
blew my mind. So I'm
Wow.
still getting information about that. But
Just
yeah,
the
so it's
resources
just,
alone to pull that off is
I
just
know, exactly.
mind-boggling.
Yeah, no, our capital markets team would have my head if I did that. So yeah, it's just trying to find that balance of, how do we customize based on region versus, making sure everyone's getting the same experience. So that's where we're living right now.
Excellent. Anybody have any thoughts to add to Manal's comments?
It's just super interesting to hear both perspectives from Manal and from Gemma, and just to kind of understand how different orgs and even countries are kind of approaching, phishing simulations and finding that kind of, I guess, inter-border kind of issues that arise. But I mean, to Gemma's point, like the fact that the government is under pressure to kind of remove that, and it's becoming more of a human rights, workplace rights kind of issue. That's eye-opening, and that tells a tale that employees are not enjoying this at all. And when we live in a world of quiet quitting and people looking for their next job and all these different things, like, we have to be very mindful of how we treat our employees, because it's easier now than ever for them to just to turn and leave. So I think, part of good retention and corporate culture and everything comes down to like a solid plan around security awareness training, and how do we bring it to them to make it worthwhile so they can learn, versus just another reprimand or something else that they're going to be afraid to face at the end of the year for the review. Or now, I'm not going to get a raise because I accidentally opened an email, but so did 7,000 other people in our org.
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't compute to me on how to build a proper security culture or a people culture.
Awesome. Thanks very much, everybody. Really good comments. We're going to have to wrap up in a second, but one thing before I let you know what our next session is going to be is I'd love people to just type something in the chat, anything that you found useful, something that you might take away. What did you find valuable in this session? Really would appreciate some feedback on that. And so our next session will be in 2 weeks, April 19th, which I think is a Wednesday at 1 p.m. And we will be talking about measuring and changing security culture. So it's a little bit of an extension to this talk. I think there will be some really good discussions to carry on. We might be repeating some of the same observations.
I like when I see people clapping, though. This is fantastic. This gets me excited for 2 weeks from now.
So hopefully this QR code will get you to the registration page for that. It's not a phishing attempt or anything. So please, you can trust us here. It's a safe space. But anyway, I really look forward to having everybody back with us in a couple of weeks, and please spread the word. We get some really good comments, I think, on the value people get out of this. Typically, we see most people staying for the whole hour. So I'm really happy about that. And we intend to keep doing this as long as people want to keep chatting about this stuff. So really appreciate everybody's joining here, and hope you stay well.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Awesome.